What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 56 of Destination the Show. We are recording on Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. You look fresh. You look great. You just woke up from a nap. Congrats.
That's what I do. That's what I do. I'm getting to that point in my life where I'm old and I have to take a pre bedtime nap just to make it through. It's crazy.
All I'm taking away from that is spending 60 minutes with me requires sleep before and afterwards, and kind of
I
harsh.
watched
That's harsh.
I watched the Wolves game last night. And that was painful. Way more painful than 60 minutes with you.
It was bad. They did not look energetic. Was the sad part to me.
No,
Anyway, we'll chat. We'll save and we'll get into, and we got plenty of time for that. But we have a guest today, so we're going to keep the chit chat to a minimum. Very very excited about this conversation. We're kind of fresh off the back of 4 episodes reviewing the Twins minor league system in a ton of depth, and so we wanted to cap that with some different perspective. And who better to provide that than kind of the OG of Twins YouTube? And that is Mr. Tom Froemming. Tom, what's up, man? How are you?
What's up? I'm also old, but not napped. So hopefully I can find a way to dig deep and bring some more energy than the T-Wolves and the last that we saw, the Twins, and set the tone. These sports teams in our town here, they need somebody to show them how it's done. And I'm just gonna have to pull through and do it tonight.
We believe in you, Tom. You have a slightly different setup in the background than last time we talked. So I was looking back, and this is cool because it's like a second annual thing. I think you're our second ever 2-time guest.
And
so
I think
this is a good tradition.
I at least have had one setup in between then too, like just like the way that my basement has had to evolve over the last year, and then sort of just where I end up is just where I have to end up. And this is where I'm making do right now, but it's kind of a tight little spot. It's sort of a relief to not have to decorate so much, though, and to just set up
nice.
so much. You guys are looking good with your backgrounds. I know that maybe the listeners can't see, but all the more reason to tune into YouTube to see this great, all these memorabilia, and this. Jeremy's got the bobbleheads in the background, and JD's got the baseball cards back there. It's good stuff.
Jeremy's is above and beyond. Tom, we were talking about this a little before, but before we jump into all the prospects and all of that good stuff, of which I know you have interesting thoughts and takes. We're talking a little bit.
Whoa! That's Midwestern for bad. I caught that.
No, Judge. Hey, I'm not from the Midwest, so you can't tarnish me with that Midwestern brush. Thank you very much. I do want to just get a couple of your thoughts on the state of the org. We talked a little bit prior to coming on about how tough and energy sapping the end of the season felt for us in terms of making content and just keeping up the energy level. Was that your experience in the tough 4 or 5 week run in there where the Twins just really eroded into dust?
I mean, it's crazy because I really started into Twins fandom in a bad year in 1999, 2000. So since then I've seen some terrible, and we've all seen some terrible Twins teams. But it is so much different when your expectations are up and you've made it through 5 months of the season and you have these expectations of what's going to happen in October, hopefully. And then to have those, just to have that a 180 in that short of a time, I think it's probably the toughest short-term period I've ever felt as a Twins fan. I don't know if you guys would agree, but and especially after last year and really post-COVID for me, really, I've been trying to sort of coach myself into not having that like Minnesota sports fan bars up and not letting anything in and sort of letting that fade away a little bit. And then especially with the Twins finally breaking the streak, of course, that was such a emotional experience for everyone. But me in particular, I let that, I let those feelings.
You let it wash over you.
Yes. Maybe too much. But yeah, it's tough. It's really crazy to think that was only a year ago today, and just how much different the vibe is. And it almost started immediately after that playoff run when we heard the payroll wasn't going to increase. That was kind of the first blow. And yeah, it's been a tough run, especially for like a fan base where it's like, yeah, we just won a playoff series last year. It was actually a winning season this year. So you would think in the grand scheme of things, like, what do we have to be all that bent out of shape about? But then you really look at what happened and it's like, oh, I see.
Yeah, things are going badly when Jeremy is increasingly talking about coaching middle school football during the beginning of episodes as opposed to Twins baseball.
Yeah, I mean, we made a good run.
Okay, one more, Tom, before we jump into prospects. Level of optimism meter around the, I guess, surprising news that the Pohlads were exploring, quote unquote, exploring a sale of the team. What's your general disposition to that in terms of if we project like 6 months, 8 months, a year down the road, and this thing's a done deal and someone new is owning the team? How are you feeling about that in general? More likely to be a better setup? What are some of your thoughts there on new ownership potential?
You can envision ways in which it's the same, or I mean, there's you can envision ways in which it might be worse. But I do think it is just sort of, it feels like it's time. It feels like it's time. It feels like that's one of the things that could be refreshed. Obviously, there's been a lot of friction between the fan base and the Pohlads. A large part of the Twins fan base feels like the Pohlads don't care at all about the fan base. And, I think to some degree that's legitimate. And, I'm not super optimistic that, number one, they're even going to get a sale done, or number two, that it's going to be within that 8 or 9 month time period that you said. That's not based on anything. That's just, looking around and seeing how, it's $1 billion plus asset. I imagine it's pretty complicated to find a seller and go through all that. But, I know Wolves fans kind of get how that process might not be so clean and easy. But I took that news as, being positive news, and I'm optimistic about how things can go in the future. And I think just generally we could use a refresh. And kind of the only scary thing that really comes in is like, what if whoever buys the team wants to move? But it really does feel like, you never know, but it does feel like Target Field having such a long term on its lease that we don't really have to worry about that much. So that really helps me feel safe about this change at this time.
Yeah, speaking of maybe feeling safe or feeling optimistic, what were your overall thoughts on the Twins minor league system in 2024?
Yeah, so many up arrow guys, and so many guys that kind of were like not even in my top 15 or so entering the year, completely broke out. A ton of guys jumping up multiple levels. There certainly were a few guys that kind of either stood pat or slid back. And then you also have the fact that, from a win, usually people don't talk about this, but since I'm watching the teams on a nightly basis, from a win-loss perspective, it actually was a pretty poor year for the minor league system.
Yeah, it
was. That doesn't matter much, but it does if you want to really break it down and really get the magnifying glass out, I think there's maybe not as much depth as we've seen in prior years, but I think the top and the guys they've graduated, I don't know. It's one of the most optimistic things you can look at with this organization. Now, I think it's going to be interesting to see how people react to the off-season organizational rankings, because the like post-draft mid-season organizational rankings had the Twins like in the top 5. I think they were second on one of them, right? But since those, David Festa, Brooks Lee, and Zebby Matthews have all graduated in the past couple months. So they're naturally just going to slide a little bit in those rankings, but it's not like those guys went anywhere. So,
right. Well,
but I think,
yeah. No, sorry to get you off. I was just gonna say that's just like the bummer to me of, or the flaw, right, of like just a rote top 100 list as opposed to, like, I know Kylie McDaniel at ESPN does kind of org talent ranking of the young guys, which still doesn't account for the guys who have broken through necessarily, or even like pre-ARB players. Like, I would love to see a little bit more of an industry-wide push for accounting for young breakthrough guys on the major league roster to account for the impact that they're having. And you just don't see it in lists. Like you say, if you look at a snapshot of the Twin system today versus even 2 months ago, it looks pretty different.
Yep.
Okay, so let's jump in. So you kindly sent along, and we're not going to spoil too much of it, like your current top 50 guys. We're going to get there in a second, but one of the reasons it's always great to have you on, Tom, is I think you are one of the most like glued in people in terms of watching as many of these Twins prospects as possible. You get good mileage out of that MILB TV subscription. I want to know, before we jump into like where guys are ranked and who you like and who you might not so much, who were some of your favorite guys to watch this year? Maybe one hitter, one pitcher who really caught your eye. What did you like about them? What should people look for next year if they're paying attention to the same guys?
Yeah, I love that we're going there, because you guys have done, over the past handful of episodes, have done such a great job of hammering on, the top 20 or so prospects and giving a great overview of where these guys are. So it's good to kind of come in with some different perspective. And this, when you're talking about prospects and projecting these guys out, this might seem like kind of a silly conversation to have, but then like flip the script and think about like some of your favorite Twins players or whoever your favorite team is. It's not always the best guy on the team. It's not always the best guy on the team that you're really connecting with. So these are the, and like you said, I watch a lot of games. I don't think I think this is a new record that I've gone almost 13 minutes without saying Andrew Morris's name. So you knew that name was coming before too long.
I did.
And, so my favorite pitcher to watch has become Andrew Morris. And it's because of how competitive he is, how animated he is, how willing to pitch with emotion he is. You don't see it every start. You don't see it every inning, but you see it. This guy is a human being on the mound. And, from like a prospect or development standpoint, do I think that's good or do I think that's bad? Maybe from a starting pitcher's perspective, maybe that's not great. But I can tell you from watching a game, I freaking love it. I love to see that emotion out of especially a pitcher. I think that's becoming more and more rare these days. I'm not sure why that is. I think you do see more of these sort of Brad Radke type kind of robotic in most situations. And again, I think there's good reason for that. But Morris, this guy joined his college program at Mesa State in Colorado at 16 years old. He was born in September, so he's kind of on that cusp to where his parents had to figure out what, were they going to push him forward or hold him back? They pushed him forward. And then when he moved from Manhattan to Alaska, okay, we're getting into the layers of intrigue that Andrew Morris is. They pushed him up another grade for I have no reason. So whenever this guy makes the major leagues, the beat writers are going to have so much fun digging through this backstory, and I'm really looking forward to that. But he basically moved kind of 2 years up in school, went to college super early, didn't have any offers from any D1 programs. From my understanding, Mesa State is a really good D2 program, though, so it's not like he kind of was without options. Senior year goes to Texas Tech. I think that background explains why this guy he has a huge chip on his shoulder. I would also say Andrew Morris is the most likely player to incite a benches clearing brawl in the system as well.
Let's go.
And again, that's not always a good thing. But yeah, this dude has a bulldog mentality. I guarantee you, once he gets he's one of the many pitchers who probably hates how he's being treated in the minors. He's one of those guys that wants to go out and throw 130 pitches a game if you'd let him. So you can see it just even through the TV screen. There's certain points where there was a game with Cedar Rapids where he was given a 4-run lead in the top of the first. He loaded the bases in the bottom of the first, got out of it, didn't give up any runs, and was like punching himself in the face off the mound essentially because he was so mad that he had an inefficient first inning when he was spotted a 4-run lead. Every review, once he got to AAA, every single umpire review he was reacting to on the mound with either a smile or a shaking his head or whatever. So there's just so much humanness and animation from him on the mound. He's so fun to watch. And then he's such an aggressive strike thrower. You're not sitting around. He has a pretty quick pace, and he throws so many strikes. I love watching Andrew Morris pitch. My hitter, this is a guy I've not really talked about as much, is Brandon Winokur. Brandon Winokur was my favorite hitter to watch last year, and it's almost because of how flawed he is. I think I like when you know a guy is flawed and he needs to go out and show and prove that he can do things that the scouting reports say he can't. And then you see sort of glimpses of the guy doing that. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it really, as the season progressed, it wasn't a complete, progression. There were some peaks and valleys, but he definitely made more contact. He definitely struck out less. He hit for more power as the year progressed. He was so much smoother at shortstop than I imagined he would be. He's not going to be a shortstop. He's not, but he was so much better there than I was imagining him. And kind of the same thing to that Andrew Morris level. This guy, and no 19-year-old man wants to have someone say this about him, but he has a weird boyish charm to him on the baseball field. You can tell he loves playing baseball. Yeah. And to contrast that with Walker Jenkins, and I'm not saying Walker Jenkins doesn't love playing. Walker Jenkins, nicknamed Captain America by his Team USA teammates, he almost has like a corporate America
for sure
presentation, and he looks like Captain America. He looks like some kind of superhero out of a comic book set in the 50s. And again, he has that corporate shine. He seems to always be saying the right thing. Brandon Winokur has kind of I don't know if it's a California. I think he's from California too.
He's a SoCal guy, yeah.
Yeah, some of the other California guys are like this too, but he has just a very kind of laid back and he just is human out there. I don't know how to explain it more than that, but he shows a lot of emotion. You can tell he really likes his teammates and his teammates like him, and he loves being on the diamond. Even though it was a long season for a guy who, being 19 years old, starting the year in the Florida State League and playing the entire season. And he missed some time due to injury, but he had to been gassed at the end of the year, and he was peaking at the end of the season. That was so fun to watch.
Yeah, dude, that 3 home run game was sick. He definitely has most likely to be like class clown vibes in his like yearbook superlatives for sure. I think kind of a goofy dude. Seems super fun. Why don't we jump into some questions around your top 50 then maybe? Jeremy, you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, so I mean, just based on what you said about Andrew Morris, I assume you have him number 1. So I'll just skip on to the next question. You talked about Morris, who's both younger and reached AAA, and then you talk about Winokur, who is younger and is lower in the organizational pecking order. How do you weigh those two things, level versus upside?
I probably lean a lot more toward upside. I think especially lately. I think maybe the past few years. I think a little more back, maybe 6-7 years ago. I was putting a lot more on performance, especially in the high minors. And that still is going to get my attention, right? Anybody who really performs in AA or above, that's a prospect. That's not like some 28-year-old, retread guy in AAA, is definitely going to move up and get my attention. But kind of that one of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm ranking guys is like, what is the upside? What could this guy be? Like I said, Brandon Winokur is not going to be a shortstop. So the conversation goes, okay, well, what could he be? And I think, maybe I was assuming he was going to be such a butcher at shortstop that the infield wasn't even going to be an option. But after seeing him look pretty smooth at shortstop, I'm thinking, and he's got a good arm too. I'm thinking, hey, maybe third base is on the table. And that's a lot. That's a lot more intriguing than just like a right fielder.
Right.
Or, the way things are nowadays, maybe he does a little bit of both. And we'll see. It's so hard. That's the hard thing though, with teenage guys, especially. How big are they going to get? They're already losing athleticism. I think at like the 18, 19, I think you start to lose athleticism a bit, and it keeps until you're about 25 or so, and then it really accelerates. But I do think I'm a little bit more upside focused. And I think that's reflected definitely in some of my rankings of the guys for sure.
Now we've teed you up. Now we're going to ask you about a bunch of those guys. Now I have one more question on like just thinking about your process a little bit, because I know this is something Jeremy and I have touched on a bunch and we find kind of difficult. How do you think about DSL guys? Because there's a few different approaches to that, right? Like I know a lot of folks will not even rank them anywhere near their top 20 until they come stateside. But when you see someone like Eduardo Beltre do what he did, and DSL Jeremy's going to start rolling his eyes any second. When you see someone like Beltre do what he did this summer, it's kind of hard to say that, or to your point about like, what could they be? It's hard to not make several really optimistic leaps in your head and say like, wow, this is kind of like star caliber talent potentially. So how do you factor in DSL guys into your rankings, and has your approach to those guys changed at all in all the years you've been ranking the Twins farm?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I always try to be super honest too. I don't really consider myself like a great scouting eye. I think there's certain things I can see better than other things, but like, again, I think my kind of secret sauce is I get to watch these guys, and I spend a lot of time watching them, and I'll rewatch. In the off season here, I'm going to go back and rewatch a bunch of stuff. So with like an Eduardo Beltre, I don't get that. I can't watch his games. We don't even really get highlights. We crossed our fingers that maybe the Twins player dev account on Twitter will share some stuff, which they do. And that's a newer thing the past couple of years. That's been so cool.
Yeah.
Because then at least you can see like, oh, this guy who's listed at 150 pounds. Oh, that was 3 years ago when he was 12. They took that or whatever, and you can see, oh, okay, this guy doesn't look like he's that anymore. But we don't have video really. We don't have data like there's not always a ton of data on the minor league guys, period. But those guys especially. So, if a guy wasn't signed to a big bonus, you're not going to see me pushing him up into my list based on their numbers. But if there's a guy who was signed to a big bonus, if there's a guy who, you hear buzz about, and then he not only goes out and performs well in terms of like just raw, like OPS or whatever, but he also has like, he's well regarded as maybe, and you would think about these 17-year-olds that they're usually, they better be running the bases and playing defense well. But if they have that in there, and then, if they have appearingly good contact skills, low K rate, maybe a good walk rate, that's sort of, you get enough evidence at that point. The team invested a bunch of money in them. And to like all these places like Baseball America get reports on these guys, and they write them up, and they're, that's information. That's another data point. And then you get the performance in there. And then I would say too, with Beltre in particular, I do have him all the way up at 12th. I have no idea if that's high or low, or it's probably high, I'm guessing. But it's kind of a tier thing for me too. Like, if you see someone like that on my list, it probably means that I'm not super secure with how I feel about the next handful of guys, probably. Because if I'm not that, if I'm talking about Eduardo Beltre in this sense that there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, but you can't be really sure, that probably means that the guys behind him, I kind of feel the same way about, but even though I am watching those guys on video, even though I am getting more data on those guys, it's an uncertainty. Like there's a couple guys though that are like, they're not even in my top 50, but when you see this guy, Murphy Hernandez, 36 for 38 in stolen base attempts in 48 games with 28 walks and 30 strikeouts. So it's almost stealing a base every game, almost
Incredible
as many
name.
walks as strikeouts. Yeah. And it's Murphy, Merphy, Murphy Hernandez. Or Iverson Ventura is another one. He only threw 16 and a third. That's the thing with the pitchers too. They throw like no innings. He threw 16 and a third innings, but a 1.10 ERA, 0.80 WHIP, a 6.5 strikeout to walk ratio. Not a ton of strikeouts, but like no walks. And he's 6'4". That's sort of the thing that stood out to me. Is sometimes you see these guys, the pitchers in particular, and they'll be like 5'10". It's like, well, okay, he needs to get a growth spurt before I even write his name down. But yeah, I mean, I'm not those numbers. If you pull up those guys' numbers, your eyeballs are going to pop out of your head. But even with that being the case, it is the Dominican Summer League. Those two names aren't guys that had big bonuses, so they're not even in my top 50. There are AAA guys that only have a pathway to potentially be a bench player or a reliever, who I would put over those guys because they're just so the upside thing there's a level to it. It's not just upside.
Okay, so I got to ask you about
that's real. And to your point, the opposite of that is, oh, go ahead, Jeremy. Sorry.
No, you follow up. I'm going to go to the next question.
Well, I was just going to say to your point, Tom, there's also the reverse of that, right? There's the DSL guy who has horrible numbers and like electric skills. Like Yoel Roque is another guy who's like, I want to say was 17 this summer, throws up to 98 already, couldn't throw enough strikes, but struck out a million guys. And you look at the numbers and you would never take a second glance at what he did in his DSL performance on paper. But if you give him a year and his mechanics are better and he's throwing more strikes and maybe he learns another pitch and his command is better and all those things, that's also the kind of guy who can pop, who, isn't even factoring into top 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s or whatever. Sorry, Jeremy, to cut you off. How are you?
No, that's a good segue into this because I want to talk about the guy you've ranked number 4th overall in your list. And that's not based on numbers because as I look at his numbers, 1-7, 5.23 ERA, 150 WHIP, at the lowest stateside level there is. But that's this guy that did have a growth spurt at some point in his life, Charlie Soto. So why so high on the young Soto?
Yeah, this something that happened after my appearance with you guys last year was I kind of really sorted out my sort of official off-season list, and actually entering this season, I had Charlie Soto as my number 1 Twins pitching prospect, above David Festa, above Marco Raya. I love the combination that he has of upside, floor, and just the physicality of Charlie Soto as an 18. This is like the prototypical starting pitcher. I'm obsessed with Charlie Soto. I'm also pretty impressed at the fact that this guy went through an entire Florida State League season as an 18-year-old. Both him and Winokur, I thought they probably would have him, playing, keep him at the complex for a little bit, kind of have him slowly get into games in Fort Myers and then go from there. But yeah, they both played at that level the entire year. As you said, Charlie Soto's overall numbers, not super impressive. He's not a guy, if you looked at the stat line, you'd be like, yeah, that's your top pitching prospect. There's multiple things to consider with that. He is still pretty new to pitching. This was really his first year as a pitcher only. He'd been a primarily a shortstop in high school. Defenses in the lower levels are atrocious. Some of the games I watched of his that really went off the rails were partly because of his defense was just terrible. But I love, he's got the floor thing is kind of what does it for me. Because his two-seamer and his changeup, I just feel like that combination is going to be able to make him be pitch efficient enough to be a starting pitcher alone and to be able to get opposite-sided hitters out because he has such a good changeup. He did not do that this year. That's something that I'm believing in that he hasn't really shown yet. That was kind of the thing that hurt him most this year was that lefties killed him. And then you combine that with the high ceiling. It's not just that he's young. It's not just the physicality. He has plus velo on his four-seam fastball, but it's not really considered a great pitch. I'm not that big of a pitching nerd to tell you why that is, but I saw it in games that he wasn't. They didn't go to that like an Andrew Morris can go to his four-seamer, even though it's 94, 95, maybe peaks at 97.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Soto can do that in the Florida State League. So you would imagine he could just dominate with that four-seam fastball, but that just wasn't the case. I do think his slider looks really good too. So, you have the floor of, I think there's that just big physical guy who's going to handle a big load. Possibly people are going to throw their headphones off when I say this phrase, but possibly a guy who can pitch to contact some with that two-seamer and then get lefties out with the changeup. And then you have that X factor of like, okay, what if he puts this all together? What if he figures out the fastball shape? What if he figures out, what if that slider can tunnel better? He's so new and so raw to pitching. But yeah, when I look at him, that's definitely where the projection comes in. I think this guy is the most likely guy to be a top of the rotation starter. And I think he's super likely to at least be a back end of the rotation starter, which I realize is insane to say about an 18-year-old guy who didn't even look good in the Florida State League. But I'm super into Charlie Soto.
Hey, but you know what, Tom? This time last year, on this very episode around this time of year, you said of Walker Jenkins, which is admittedly less of a spicy take. This time next year, he has a good chance to be in the conversation for the number one overall prospect in baseball. And now, where is he per MLB pipeline? I think he's 2, 3. I don't even know where he is, but he's certainly top 10. And I think there's a handful of places that have him top 3. So your bold predictions have been accurate before. Okay, so let me ask you, because I want to ask you about another pitcher. So I'm going to see if I can mind meld with you to get you to say who this is. Who is the Twins pitcher you are most excited to watch in 2025 in the lower levels of the organization?
Like as a guy we've seen before, or as a guy
Nope. As a guy who as a guy who we have not seen yet throw a single professional pitch.
Yeah, we can put all
these. Does he have a mustache? Oh, let me flip those ones down. Okay. I think you're probably going to Dason Hill.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, like, I'm not sure how much we're going to see him. I was surprised at how much of Soto we got to see. Maybe it certainly worked in terms of getting Soto a lot of work. I know his performance wasn't great again. I think that's going to be so good for him in the long run. Dason Hill is a little bit more of a slender guy. And, saying that now, God, a kid that age from draft day, he could have already put on 20 pounds for all we know. These guys grow. It's insane to see sometimes guys 1 year to the next how big they are. But yeah, Dason Hill from this last year draft class, other than that slenderness to him, also kind of sounds like a prototype. When I again, not a guy I've seen a ton of, but a guy I've read a lot about. A big, tall, left-handed pitcher, and it's just sounds like every pitch I hear people talk about with him, it's like, okay, the fastball is good, and he has a good breaking ball, and he has a good changeup. Like, it just, when I was learning about him when they drafted him, everything kind of pointed towards like, why did he go when he went then? Like, why wasn't he a higher pick? Was what I'm thinking as I'm learning about him. So not a guy I know a ton about, but a guy I'm excited about, and again, a guy I really believe in his upside. I have him 11th. And again, I do think that kind of tells you more about some of the things I think about the guys in my, 13 to 20 range.
Mm-hmm.
It maybe explains why Dason Hill and Eduardo Beltre are where they are. And they're in a tier, and I might have pushed them to the top of a tier where some other people might have them at the bottom of that tier. And in reality, do we think that much differently about these guys? Maybe not. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah, I feel you. Dason Hill is my Charlie Soto. I think the prospect I'm most excited to see next year. I mean, because of everything you outlined, right? But yeah, everything you said is true. Like four pitch mix, like you talk about frame, and his is not the same. He doesn't have the same level of physicality. Maybe he'll be a David Festa kind of body type who just like perpetually sits at like 6'5", 185 pounds, and I think that's going to work out fine for Festa. But Hill also coming from the left side, I think it's going to be so fun next year. So I'm hoping to get some good run at Fort Myers.
Don't you think that that's just kind of the plan that they have for these guys, though? Like that they'll do the same thing with him, and it'll be almost identical to what Soto did. I mean, why wouldn't you at this point?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I hope so. And I guess the thing that surprised me with Soto is, and there's other stuff that's going on. I just was shocked at how free they were with him when they've been so careful with Marco Raya.
Yeah.
But fair. I think there's probably some other stuff there. Raya, he doesn't have that size. I think that's maybe part of it. And then, I don't know what to think about whatever his shoulder injury history. This is Marco Raya. Shoulders are really mysterious. I struggle just in general to try to figure out what to do with Marco Raya, but just with how careful they were with Marco Raya, I did not imagine them taking the wheels off of Charlie Soto as early as they did. And he was mostly having shorter starts too, but he was pitching deep into some games as well and getting some good pitch counts as an 18-year-old. So that really surprised me. Yeah, I hope that is kind of the default plan, as long as there isn't some kind of an injury that clouds things with Hill.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So speaking of some 2024 draftees, I got to ask why you hate Kyle DeBarge and Billy Amick.
I can't learn. I can't learn that might be like my biggest flaw in ranking prospects. All of these infield guys, all of these college infield guys, almost. If they can't play shortstop, I've underrated with Spencer Steer. I was never a fan of him. Tanner Schobel, even Luke Keeschel. Last year at this time, I don't have my list handy, but I was not all that excited about Luke Keeschel. And now I have him with these recent graduations as my number 3 Twins prospect. So this is just like, I'm not confident that DeBarge is going to be a shortstop. Amick, I'm not confident he's going to be third baseman. And like that, they have to hit like crazy then. Like if Billy Amick's going to be a first base DH, even if DeBarge can play second and maybe even play some outfield too, like they're going to have to do everything else super well. And I just kind of need to see it before I believe it. And maybe that's that projection thing. I'm projecting them to not be able to be in those positions that they're in. And I'm projecting them to not really do those things that they're going to need to do at their different defensive homes. And again, there have been multiple guys that have made me look bad who kind of have this kind of similar profile in a way in the past. So like, it's just sort of, I think at this point, it kind of can come down to like, these are the guys I'm most willing to be wrong about. And like Charlie Soto's not a guy I'm willing to be wrong about. And I do think about that from a Twins fan perspective in rankings. I'm kind of trying to suggest what my trade valuation rankings would be as well. Like I'm saying I would keep these guys over these guys, Yep. So that's kind of what leads into that. Yeah, they certainly have a type. they've had a lot of success with that type of guy. But I guess that's just kind of me saying that that type's not my type.
So it's funny that you say that though, because for me, Billy Amick is like the college version of Brandon Whitaker.
Like from the hitting standpoint,
Right.
yeah, I can get behind that. But the big difference is Brandon Whitaker's a child, and Billy Amick started like a grown man who played in the SEC. You know,
Right.
it's harder for me to dream on him. But you know, I know that was a pick that, you know, the Twins feel really good about getting him where they got him.
Yeah.
And you know, that's a good guy to have in the system. You know, I do. Let's see.
I mean, they're 2 years different. Like one is going to turn 22 in November, and the other one's going to turn 20 in December. So they're not exactly, you know.
Yeah, but I think a big thing too is that I believe that Brandon Whitaker can probably be a third baseman, and if he's in the outfield, be an asset. You know, not in center field. I don't really think he's going to be a center fielder either.
Right.
But I think he has, and then he also has some value he can bring on the bases, maybe more than your average kind of guy like that. So I think that would be kind of the bigger. I see more of a diverse skill set there than I do with Billy Amick. Now, how much does that matter? Like, if you're just going to be Christian Encarnacion Strand, like, there's a good chance if that's what happens with Billy Amick, I'm talking about him as my favorite guy I watched in 2025 when we do this a year from now, because I do just love me a power hitting dude. And yeah, it could certainly be where Billy Amick just basically sweeps me off my feet this coming season, and I'm, you know, hyping him up before long. But yeah, again, I think those rankings are more me saying I'm willing to be either late on these guys or wrong on these guys.
Yeah. For the record, I'm not a huge Billy Amick fan. I'm okay with the fact he was drafted 60th overall.
Yeah.
If you'd have been a first round pick, I'd have been like, geez, that's not exciting at all. But I think when you take a guy like that after you've had some other selections, if it works out, that's awesome. If it doesn't work out, you're like, well, hey, it was worth a shot, right?
Yeah, I'm way more into him as a value at his pick than DeBarge.
See, I'm the opposite. I loved the DeBarge pick.
Okay.
We were nerdy on DeBarge for a long time ahead of the draft, though, to be fair. He was one of our under the radar guys from the consensus board and this and that and the next thing. Although I feel like we spent a month convincing ourselves that Kyle DeBarge was going to be drafted by the Guardians. He seems like such a Guardian.
Yes, he does. Yeah, so I have DeBarge at 21 and Amick at 22 right now. So just outside of my top 20. You know, some of that, you know, to be completely honest, some of that might also just be, you know, I've watched a ton of some of these other guys.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's real. I think you're going to feel a little more positive on Amick after you see him melt some baseballs like Brandon Whitaker does. I mean, when Brandon Whitaker connects with the baseball, right, he does not hit cheap home runs. And I think,
and this is in the Florida State League, big league spring training parks. This isn't, you know, cheapos that are flying over 315-foot fences in the Midwest League or anything. Yeah.
All right, let me ask you about one more guy, but we're going to zoom all the way down closer to the bottom of your list, and then we'll duck out of the top 50 and then ask you some kind of general questions about looking ahead to 2025 and whatnot. So last guy I want to ask you about is Peyton Eales, who you have at 33. Honestly, one of the most interesting minor league stories of the season. Twins continue to find like really interesting value on the margins through undrafted guys. He's a guy with a really great skill set in terms of approach. Takes a lot of walks, very patient at the plate, good bat to ball skills, all of that stuff. Doesn't hit the ball super hard. What do you think he can be? Does he have a shot, in your opinion, Tom, to be a major league hitter? What are your thoughts on Eales, or is he just kind of a sub-in utility guy? What do you make of him?
This is the conversation I've been avoiding for months and months and months, because like I love just to push. Look at this. Look at what this guy's doing, you know? And I do the prospect rankings. I actually started writing about the minors before I started doing prospect lists. And I kind of had to start doing lists because I had to check myself, because I started to get upset with other people's lists. How can they have this guy at 21? But then when I sat down and ranked it out, I'd put that guy at 21. So it was like I almost started doing the rankings to keep myself honest and to prevent, I love all these guys. I'm a Twins fan first. So of course, all of these guys I'm rooting for and want to do well. Peyton Eales, I almost just want to talk about how well he performed more than his actual prospect status in my eyes.
You can do whatever you want, Tom. The floor is yours, my friend.
Because people want to know. That's kind of the big question. Maybe the Twins minor league player of the year last year, if you really want to kind of dig down him versus Keishall or whoever. But, talking about upside, what is the upside? What is the upside with Peyton Eales? I think he could be a big leaguer, but it's more of as like an up and down kind of last guy on the bench. I think second base is really the only position you can trust him at in the field. And defense is kind of tough in game because you're just not seeing make a whole lot of plays, but I've seen him not make a lot of plays elsewhere. Range is pretty limited, but he's got that Brooks Lee thing where the range is limited, but he's going to make every play that he gets to the ball. So he's going to make some remarkable looking plays that a normal major leaguer makes fairly routine, to be honest. So I really only see that avenue there at second base. Again, that's such a bummer to be like that as an indie ball signing, though. Like you would just hit the jackpot if that's the conversation. But I know a lot of people are super excited about him. I mean, like we talked about with certain guys who make it to the Twins who aren't the best player, who are going to be your favorite. Peyton Eales is going to be freaking everybody. He's going to be the next Willians Astudillo, essentially. He's going to be everybody's favorite guy. Everybody's going to be looking for him if he makes it up to the Twins. But I don't know. I think he's pretty maxed out. I think he had a pretty magical season this year. Clearly works insanely hard. He's short. He's 5'5", but you can't call him small. He has like the biggest thighs I've ever seen on a human being. I don't know how he did that to his body. It's like the most disproportionate thing you've ever seen. I love Peyton Eales. I'm so excited to see him a ton. And he's going to be around for a while. They just signed him last year. That's going to be super fun. But I think this is kind of more of, maybe your Randy Dobnak is a good kind of comp where, we might see him come up and we might see him kind of do some cool stuff. But it's kind of more of an up and down guy and not, I don't expect him to replicate the numbers he put up in St. Paul or anything like that.
Heard it here first, folks. Certified Peyton Eales hater, Tom Froemming.
Which really takes the heat off me because I said a long time ago it was just a feel-good thing. And so now that Tom's kind of doubled down on what he just did, I'm off the hook. All right.
Is that how you guys feel though too?
I don't. I think that we've had this conversation multiple times now, to be fair, right? And so I think we first talked about him on the podcast on like August 6th, where he was first maybe heading up to St. Paul. And we're like, wow, look how incredible this guy's been on multiple levels. He just keeps hitting wherever he goes. And we definitely came to the conclusion that first time that was like, well, this isn't really a thing yet. We need to see how he does at St. Paul. And then he just continues to put up great numbers. And so I kind of feel like our next take on it was like he deserves a shot of major league playing time somewhere in 2025. Role and quantity of said playing time to be determined. Maybe that's with the Twins. Maybe that's with another organization. But I also maintain a little bit of skepticism about how much he can do, just because, and it's still a smallish sample size at AAA. He does not hit the ball hard at all. And he does have the kind of skill set to kind of navigate that or circumvent that. But also wonder, that's going to erode a little bit when you're facing better pitching at the big league level. So remarkable performance though. And like you say, for someone signed out of indie ball who wasn't drafted,
for $500.
Incredible story.
Yeah. And maybe it's not this year, but if he spends all year at St. Paul and just continues to do what he's been doing, you can't ignore it, right? I mean, that's the fun of it, and that's all about production and zero about upside. At some point, you just can't ignore a dude that's really good at playing baseball. So, all right, let's move out of your top 50 if you'd like with this question. So back in the Twins prospect handbook days, we used to stick our star on our breakout guy, right? So now that we don't do that anymore, who's that guy that you have, whether it's top 50 or whoever, we're writing our book, and I'm like, Tom, all right, time for you to pick your breakout player in 2025. Who's going to make that jump in 2025?
It's going to be guys in my top 50, because if I really felt that strongly about them, they'd find their way in there, because there's enough, when you're going to 50, there's enough kind of guys, especially once you get out of the top 30, you're kind of a little wishy-washy on some of those guys anyway. And there's like the like number 30 or number 41 to like number 75. Like there's so little difference in like how you'd grade those guys anyway. Some of the obvious ones, just looking at it, Connor Prelip's like an obvious one to throw in this. He's a huge profile guy. He was drafted pretty high, got a pretty good bonus, pretty well-known piece in the system. But I think he has kind of, and I've done this too. We've talked so much about his fellow draft mates in that class of, the Morrises, the Zebbies, all those other guys, and even Festa, who's not in that class. They've just had so much success with these late round guys. That's been such a talking point, and for good reason. That Connor Prelip, it's insane to say, is like kind of flying under the radar.
Yep.
I talked about Soto as probably being the guy I think has the best potential to really be a true top of the rotation starter. That's really only because I'm not so sure Connor Prelip can ever stay healthy. If you tell me Connor Prelip can stay healthy, that's my guy, who I think is the number one potential top of the rotation starter. And obviously that's a big question with the health. So I did recently bump him up in my rankings some, because he's entering the offseason healthy. I think that's such a huge X factor for Connor Prelip, getting through some innings this year, going through, hopefully, fingers crossed, a regular full offseason. And it's like, let's go. Obviously they're not going to have him throw a ton of innings. They might even hold him back at the complex for a while. But I think he's just an obvious one, not just to take a jump, in terms of not on the radar to on the radar, but take a jump to like top 50 universal prospect in all of baseball. And so much of that depends on if he can stay healthy. Danny De Andrade is another guy who I had comfortably inside my top 10 entering this season, missed most of this year, and to be honest, looked different at Cedar Rapids than he had in Fort Myers, which you don't see a hitter, especially, you get out of that tough environment in Florida, you go to the Midwest League. Usually that's when kind of guys take off. Mm-hmm. So Danny De Andrade has kind of slid down my rankings, but I kind of want to make sure his name is out there too. Yasser Mercedes, kind of hitting on more of the guys who are obvious. He seems like an obvious one too. Adrian Bajorquez, a starting pitcher. I know Fangraphs is like already put him in their top 20, but he is not nearly as on the radar anywhere else. Needs to throw more strikes, but he's a guy you could see pop up. Kadeem Zhao is the guy from the most recent draft class that kind of intrigues me, and I don't have him. It's not like I have him above DeBarge or Amick or anything, but I'm very curious to see what his season looks like and his performance looks like next year. And then, speaking about that, kind of pitchers getting overshadowed and even possibly classes getting overshadowed. There's not a lot of talk about last year's pitching class. And there's some reasons for that. They certainly didn't do things that like the, Morris Matthews, Culpepper, Lewis class did. But Ty Langenberg, who is another late round draft pick from Iowa, had a kind of a sneaky good season. It wasn't super loud, but he pitched well in Fort Myers, pitched well in Cedar Rapids, had some poor outings that kind of took a hit to his overall numbers, but he missed quite a few bats. I think that's another guy who could, and I think he made it through the whole year healthy and logged quite a few innings for a guy in his first full season, Ty Langenberg. Guy who's good size too. Looks like he's got a good frame. I could see him taking a jump next year.
I like that. That's a robust list. Jeremy, you got to throw your hand to the ring now.
A lot of the names that Tom mentioned, like Prelip's my guy, and I feel very much the same. Like if he's healthy for the year, he's the best pitching prospect in the organization. And Zhao is a name that kind of on the periphery there that I think could be interesting. Other than that, I mean, it's a lot of guys, and it's hard because I don't know that we expect guys to break out at Double-A, and a lot of these other guys that are on the list are guys that we certainly are waiting around for. Like I look at MLB's list, and it's like the Kalai Rosarios, the Tanner Schobels, like we know who these guys are. Severino, like none of these guys are going to break out.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard too because just like Tom said and like we've talked about, so many up arrows from a year ago. So you're not going to break out after you've already had a kind of a breakout year. So it's maybe it's a non-answer, but I got to feel like someone from this past draft class, and maybe it's a Kyle DeBarge that just comes out and outplays expectations, and maybe it's someone that we haven't talked about at all, right? And so I'd have to do a little more digging. I do like the D'Andrade thing. I haven't looked at how he's doing in the AFL. He's there, right?
I don't think he's played a game yet.
I don't think he's been active yet. He's on the roster, but I don't believe the last I checked he had not played yet. So I'm not sure. I don't know the story there.
Because him to me too. Like I really liked him, and then it's like you do the injury thing and out of sight, out of mind. And I would we kind of talked about, right? He's going to get a chance to make up some of these at bats, and then he hasn't. But then all the other guys that would be potential breakouts are the guys that are coming to Fort Myers for the first time or leaving Fort Myers for the first time to go to Cedar Rapids, and that's just it's a dart throw. And so I like the names that you mentioned. I think you mentioned Mercedes. Rodriguez would be another one to kind of throw into that mix, but it's going to have to be from that next wave, right? Because I think the other guys have all kind of done themselves a favor.
Yep, that's good.
You got to have some now, Jamie.
You guys took all the guys.
I did mention like 43 guys. That's what you got to do. You guys didn't give me a cap.
I should have gone first.
I'm literally just gonna read through my list, and then
I should have gone first.
All I'm gonna do is edit that part out.
I mean,
put it on Twitter.
There you go. I would say my most. I mean, like the obvious answer here, right, is it's one of the higher pick hitters from 2024, but that's also boring. So one pitcher who I think is flying way under the radar. And Tom, I feel like you're on about Ty Langenberg, but Spencer Bengard is another guy who works a lot in relief, who didn't necessarily have like really dominant numbers, but was just really effective and really produced pretty much all season for Myers and Cedar Rapids. I don't necessarily think like the upside is enormous there, but you couldn't have asked for much more, I think, from him in terms of how he performed in 2024. And then if we want to get really off the map, Peyton Carr, who did not debut, I believe, because he was rehabbing from injury. He's another 2024 draft pick, 10th rounder, third baseman out of High Point University. He is a sneaky guy who is getting a little bit more nerdy draft love ahead of the 2024 draft, who potentially is someone who might have gone quite a bit higher with just a lot of interesting offensive tools and traits. And assuming he's healthy, I think he's someone who could take off decently. That I don't even think we've talked about him on the show since draft night. So that's my way off the map one is Peyton Carr.
I'll throw a way off the map one. I think at least Ricardo Pena, who was with the FCL Twins this year, a guy who, it was one of those guys, like I say, I'm really going to pay attention to bonuses. He signed originally a $300,000 bonus, so not a huge bonus guy, but just has been really had a great year in the FCL last year. Taking that, as a 19-year-old who spends most of his time catching, so he's got a lot else going on. But yeah, he had, almost as many walks as strikeouts and 970 OPS. That's a name I could see popping up next year.
Love it. We love the off the radar ones. Well, we already talked about this next question, so I want to skip it around like who we think is maybe the most likely top 100 prospect from the Twin system in 2025. And the reason I thought of that was, right, like Keishel was a complete surprise and Zebby was a complete surprise. And those are like the two most outsized impacts on the Twins system kind of vaulting up last year, right? Like when you have guys who are not even in top 100 consideration, suddenly they're top 75 universal prospects. That's a big deal. I feel like Prelip is a guy we've mentioned. Anyone else, Tom, on your radar who might feature there potentially if things break right for them in 2025?
Well, you mentioned how like unpredictable that was, that those guys jumped. I think on this show, when we were talking about pitching prospects, I'd sort of in conversation thrown out like, oh, Zebby Matthews, but he's not going to be on the Twins this year. It was impossible. It was impossible to envision that could have happened, and it did. So that's the really fun thing with prospects in general. But I do think the Twins are onto something here. And I kind of alluded to it a bit with their infield guys that I don't really get. I think they really get the type of talent and people that they can work with. I think they honestly can identify even personality traits in guys that they can feel like this guy's either going to, work his tail off or he can really comprehend data. So I just think we're in a really exciting space here with this system in that it's unlikely we'll have something like that happen again, but it happened. Right. It happened once. It could happen again.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't really have any oddball name to throw out. The guys that we've already mentioned who haven't been in a top 100 to be like Soto, Andrew Morris, Kalen Culpepper, who I'm actually pretty high on. I think he is so much better of a defensive shortstop than any of the reports about him as a draft prospect indicated at all. And then we already talked about Winokur, who I love. I don't think there's a very high likely that he could be a top 100 prospect, but he has that kind of tantalizing upside. A guy I will throw out, though, just sort of because nobody really talks about this guy, and he's quietly been producing. Might even get added to the 40-man roster this offseason because he is Rule 5 eligible. Ricardo Olivar. I've had him fairly not crazy high ranked, but I think he's my number 14 prospect now. And I just think he's, not nearly as talked about as a lot of the other guys in the system. Kind of, and there are reasons for that. Maybe kind of a boring, in some ways, player. He's a catcher. He plays left field. He doesn't do either of those things particularly well. Doesn't hit for crazy power, but hits for some power. Doesn't strike out a lot. Draws an okay amount of walks. He had an 823 OPS last year. Most of that was done in Cedar Rapids. Came up to Wichita late in the year and didn't really impress. But so many of the guys, moving up that level didn't. So that's maybe a name, like if we're thinking about somebody who we can't fathom being there. I'm not sure what it would take because, again, he's such a, he doesn't have that 5-tool profile, but he has been a pretty good performer. And, if somehow he comes out and behind the plate, maybe he takes a bunch of steps forward this offseason, maybe that's a guy to be aware of.
Like that. Great hitter. Just not sure about everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, dang. I'm really frustrated that I missed this when we were talking about him, but we got to circle back because you suggested this as a talking point, so I definitely want to hit it. Dave Festa innings jump. had a significant innings jump. Okay, something we have covered at nauseum on this show is Marco Raya's pitch count, the amount that he is, or the lack of his being allowed to go through order the third time. I want to say he was capped around 75 at the end of the season. And I know you've said, it's difficult to know what to make of him because of the injury history. He's still very young and kind of on the doorstep of the majors, although obviously we might expect him to get some serious run at AAA. Do you think he can, or he will be permitted to, and can shoulder, no pun intended, a much more significant workload in 2025 than he saw in 2024?
Yeah, I'm curious about your guys' thoughts on this, and this conversation might actually impact where I put him, because right now I have Raya 7th. That's probably, I have him behind Soto and Andrew Morris. There's probably not too many, if anybody else, that's going to have him down that far. At this point last year, I looked at both Festa and Raya and said, well, these guys are probably going to be relievers. So David Festa coming out this year and having this really big innings jump that really kind of went hand in hand with him throwing way more strikes than he had. That's really how the innings jump happened, is he was throwing more strikes, was way more efficient, throws more innings. And it kind of, and this is sort of me again, am I going to make the same mistake again with these infielders? It's sort of, so I looked at these guys and said they were relievers last year. Am I really going to make that mistake again with Marco Raya? Because Marco Raya this past season threw a little bit more innings than David Festa did the preseason before. So, how am I going to sit here and be like, well, David Festa did it, but Marco Raya can't? And it is hard. I like the way you put it, that Marco Raya wasn't allowed to pitch deeper into games, because that is what it is. Of course, he had some bad starts where, everybody has some bad starts where you're not going to go too deep into a game anyway. But he had a lot of really good starts that got cut off in the third or fourth inning, even regardless of pitch count at times. I think he averaged about 4 innings per outing through 60 pitches per start. I'm still kind of struggling because, again, my worries are more toward why are the Twins doing this with him? Because they haven't done that with an 18-year-old. So why are they doing this, continuing to do this with Marco Raya? And then you mentioned, knocking on the doors of he's going to get added to the 40-man roster here soon. It's not really easy to have a pitcher, especially on your 40-man roster, that you just never turn to. That's, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago now, Simeon Woods Richardson got called up for okay, we just need an arm. You're the last healthy arm on our 40-man roster. So you got to come up and provide us some depth on this doubleheader day or whatever. So I think that's something I'm curious about. What do you guys have to think about that? Because I think Marco Raya, being a high school drafted guy, being added to the 40-man roster this offseason, this timeline is working against him potentially being able to build himself into a starting pitcher. So from a prospect perspective and grading a guy, can you really hold that against him as a prospect? Because is that too high level to really go that deep and hold it against him that, all these things that he can't control are going to work against him being a starting pitcher, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting conversation, right? And Jeremy, I'll for sure be curious of your thoughts. I think the conclusion I've come to with Raya is that the way that he has been handled is just about preserving health for as long as possible while he works his way up. And my assumption, which, well, who knows, what may well be wrong, is that this year he is going to be let off the leash and he is going to be allowed to gradually continue to increase that pitch count. Maybe it's 75 in April, and then halfway through May, it's up to 85. And then suddenly you're looking at much more of a starter's workload. But I think it's about health. I think it's about frame, right? He's listed at 6'1", 170. He's probably not 170, but he's probably not a ton more than that. He's a smaller guy. And I don't, my personal approach to that is you can't ding him and call him a reliever before the org has, one, given him an opportunity to meaningfully start, and two, before they've shoehorned him into that role. And so for rankings purposes, I gotta assume he is a starter and think through what can he be as a starter, what do his pitches look like, what are the shapes like, what's good, what's not so good. The breaking ball is exceptional, all of that. But I treat him. I'm going to continue to treat him as a starter until there's more explicit kind of organizational signs that they're not seeing it the same way. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, and I guess, and this is, I'm going to make a comparison here, not at all because they're similar players, but because I felt the same way about this player as he came up through the organization. Like, are they ever going to let him throw more? And if they don't, how is he ever going to be a starter? And that's Bailey Ober. And Ober threw so little, right? I'm looking at his stuff. In 2017, he threw 28 innings coming out of the draft. In 2018 and 2019, it was 75 and 78, which is similar to what Reisman. In 2020, no official stats. And then in 2021, threw 108 innings. And like just kept making that jump where it's like it felt like it was going to be too much. And then in 2023, he throws 166. In 2024, he throws 178. Like there's still that opportunity for Raya to progress through there. Obviously, when you're talking about a 6'9" monster of a human, that's different than when you're talking about a guy that, for me, is similar to Jose Barrios, who's also very durable, right? And so, I like from my perspective, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt because I think you don't handle a guy the way that the Twins have handled him unless you really believe that he's got what you want him to have, right? And so to bump him up to AAA at the end of the year for that one start tells me all I need to know about how the Twins view him as a prospect. Dude's still younger than Andrew Morris, right? Hasn't thrown a ton, has had some real weird outings. But I think when we talked to Jonas Lovin, he was very much like the development part of things, right? And so those weird outings might have less to do with his stuff and more to do with here's what you're going to do tonight. You're going to do it in this many pitches. And then you're going to come out of the game and then we're going to reevaluate that. And then in 5 days or 6 days, we're going to do it again. And it's like the COVID draft was weird, right? The development of all of those players was weird. If they thought anything differently of him as far as prospect status, they would have just been like, we're gonna handle this differently. And he's progressed to the point now he's one promotion away from being a major leaguer at 22 years old. And like I said, that tells me all I need to know about how this organization views him as a prospect.
Yeah, I think that's as he really has been for like 2 years. He's probably the guy you want to look to in the score box the most of anybody in the entire system like the last 2 years because he's being handled a little bit different than everybody else. And yeah, he's incredibly talented. Yeah, I have no question about his if his pitches are going to be good enough. I have some questions about whether he's going to learn how to use all those pitches, not facing as many hitters as he has.
Right.
And on the one side, it is difficult to argue with a plan that got a guy through an entire season. And Marco Raya was healthy the entire year.
Yeah.
There's just not that many guys you can say that about. So I can't sit here and say like the Twins have mishandled Marco Raya. And that's a big reason why. But just the fact that he was only pitching once a week too. He's pitching every seventh day. It's just seems like a lot to overcome. And I just hope I hope for him that 2025 gets to be that stepping stone year that he needs and is in a situation where it's kind of like David Festa where our rotation blew up. Yeah, you're on our 40-man roster. You're coming up.
Yep.
You're pitching every fifth day. We'll just see how you hold up. I'm not saying he couldn't hold up to that. I just feel like we can't know. And so, yeah, I just hope that he gets this year. And at his age, he still should get this year to continue to develop and have this be a building block year. But I worry that that's not going to be the way it works out, especially just with all the other stuff going on with the Twins and their payroll and everything else. Lots of pitching depth, lots of other options, but
doesn't that give you a little bit more or a little less cause for concern? Like, you have all of these other guys, right? The Zebby that's made it, the Festa that's made it, the Woods Richardson who's had a really good year. We haven't mentioned Corey Lewis's name yet. You talked about Andrew Morris at length. CJ Culpepper's got to be involved. Like, there's so many names where it's like, this is a different type of prospect, and we're not counting on him to be the number 3 starter next year or the year after that or the year after that. But you got to believe that there's still upside where could you is there some way that you could look through a lens and say, could Marco Raya be a starting pitcher in a playoff game at this point?
Yeah.
So don't we love that
talent? Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so that's why I think they've done so much with the pitching depth in this organization, that when you have these different types of guys that you don't necessarily have to count on, like Connor Prelove, if he turns out in the top 10% of the outcomes, he's your number 1. And that bumps everybody down when you still have a young Joe Ryan, a young Bailey Ober. Like, to me, it's fun to have this type of thing, this type of guy, as compared to a guy where you're like, well, he could maybe be a number 4 starter. Like, this is more fun. This is what you want to do as an organization, is give yourself a bunch of different avenues. And for me, it's like, I think I said this a couple weeks ago. He's my number 1 pitching prospect right now in this organization, because he's 22. He's knocking on the door, and we don't know what that outcome is going to be. Maybe he's a reliever. Maybe he turns into Fernando Romero, and it doesn't work out. But I do think that there's an outcome where it's going to look positive for the Twins. And that's in an organization that has 0 homegrown talent for like 45 years. I'm exaggerating. If you find a guy,
by how much though? In the rotation? I mean,
you find a COVID, you unearth a gem in the COVID year, and then you can develop him even though he didn't pitch the whole next year, right? And now he's 22 and close. Like that to me is it's a win for how they've developed him, even though we've literally scratched our heads for 56 episodes wondering why he's been handled the way he's been.
All right, man. Let's ask you one more question and then get you out of here. Because this is another topic I think that you suggested that I think is a great one. And the last off season was not very fun. Just in terms of like a roster building perspective, right? I think maybe we assumed that was going to be more on the trade front, and then the 2024 trade deadline was worse than not fun. Is there a guy in the system who you would sell high on if you're looking to improve the major league roster? And, that can be as high wattage or as low wattage as you want. But you said right off the top, Tom, in your kind of 30,000 foot view, so many up arrow guys. To me, that points towards the possibility, especially with some of the financial stuff that we know is going on, of a trade. Who are you most willing to cut loose?
You can file this one under continuing the Tom never learns, and he just continues to hate on the guys. Luke Keeschel. Luke Keeschel would be my pick there, and that's the ultimate up arrow guy. And I like Luke Keeschel. Again, he's my number 3 prospect now with those recent graduations. But if there's a team that views him as a top 40 prospect in all of baseball, as Baseball America has him rated, I am dangling him out there. That is, I don't think he's that. I just don't. And it's hard because he had that elbow injury and DH primarily. So, but he's a second baseman who's playing some center field as well. I don't know how it's tough for me to say how viable he is as a center fielder. And again, this isn't taking anything necessarily away from Luke Keeschel. I just think that how far, and I think MLB Pipeline had him as a top 70 prospect in all of baseball, not quite as crazy, but top 40, that's pretty wild. And I don't know, that might
Aggressive.
have been based on a lot of what they heard from the Twins, because I know the Twins are like obsessed with Luke Keeschall. They talk about him like he's like the hardest working guy they've ever had. And, you know, they just love him. But that's just really tantalizing. And I know teams really aren't trading this type of player as much. I don't think a single top 100 prospect got traded at the trade deadline this year. Maybe more likely in the offseason. But I think when you're in a situation like the Twins, part of this too is, okay, you want to keep Luke Keeschall. He's already in Double-A. Where do you view him in the picture of the MLB club? Because there's a lot of other guys in the picture who don't project to be going anywhere. Now maybe they trade one of those guys, and that's where Keeschall kind of steps in. But that's the prospect that I would kind of be looking to sell high on.
Very interesting. Jeremy, you can either react to that because you made a face, or you got another name, or both. Let's have both.
Well, yeah. So I think it'd be hard to sell high on him because right now he's damaged, right?
I suppose.
And so even at the deadline, I think if they would have been able to sell him or that sounds terrible, to trade him, the team that was going to know, and it's like, yeah, but he's going to have to undergo this. So it's like his value was already dented. And I feel like if he comes back and starts hitting 300 at Double-A again, then the opportunity, but he's gonna blow these other guys right out of the way, the Julians, the potentially Mirandas. So my answer is going to be the same as it was a year ago, even though it's not a high watermark. Like Erod, the value.
Boo this man,
right?
Boo.
But I still think
is he not damaged goods right now too? I mean,
for real.
I guess
he is. But that's the one that I feel like if the Twins want to make a splash and get a guy, he's the one that's going to bring something. But because of his status, with you don't know about the thumb, it's going to cost. There's going to be you're going to have to throw in a little extra bonus there, and that comes from probably that third tier of yours, where it's like, man, do we really have to give that up to get something else? Because I think Erod still has value, and it's like, how bad is the thumb? For him to basically miss the whole year and to have it re-aggravated a number of times, that's a problem. But again, who else fits in this? It's like these up arrow guys that you mentioned. It's like, how much is Andrew Morris really going to bring back? Don't you want to see more of that, right? And so that's where this becomes a really hard question to answer because of the recent graduates, and that's probably the group that we got to talk about if we're gonna talk about who are we trading. Are we going to trade a Zebby type? I don't see that, but it's possible. You could maybe get something for that. Brooks Lee, problem is he wasn't great, right? In fact, he was probably bad. And so where's his value at? So I just think it's a weird kind of dynamic because you want to sell guys, trade guys when their value's up. And right now those guys are just not, either their value's not up or they're not going to get top value because of some concerns. And so that's just, it seems like a really, really difficult question and sparks great conversation because I just don't know that there's a great answer.
Yeah.
Can I give my second answer before you get yours, JD?
yeah, dear thing.
My second answer was going to be actually Kalen Culpepper. As much as I like him, you might think, well, they just drafted him. Well, they traded Chase Petty right after they drafted him. So it's not like, there's anything, that prevents them from doing that. And he's a guy who, came out and looked pretty good in Fort Myers, and again, I think maybe showed some things that, and I read some stuff about, he had maybe tweaked his swing toward the end of the college season. And maybe there's some, teams that overlooked him a little bit in the draft might have looked a bit like, where was this guy when we were scouting him? That's, again, this is a really kind of out there idea to throw out, but we've seen Twins do it before.
Yeah, it's a good call.
That is a good call. And the other thing, to your point about him looking good at shortstop, was that last season was the first year he played shortstop in college. He played third base exclusively before then and moved to, in part, boost his stock ahead of being drafted and clearly that worked well because you only need one team. And he did look great defensively. My answer is boring, but I'll give it anyway. On the Erod thing though, Jeremy, I do agree with you in one facet there. Like I just wrote him up his like scouting report today, and like there's still like really major questions about whether he is going to hit enough to be as good as he can be. And obviously there's like, you know, the 90th percentile outcome for Erod is like superstar, but there's also reality where he's just like a sub 200. Right.
I love that you had such a wonderful written bio on this guy, and then you read it and you're like, God dang it, Jeremy's right.
Hey, I had to be brutally honest. I don't know if I'm willing to go as far as you were right. I feel like the most likely scenario is one of the young dudes off the roster, right? So I'm in a cluster like Brooks Lee, Miranda, Julian, Larnach, like one of that, like Matt Wallner, one of that cluster of guys that are young, probably not Wallner, and then some of the AAA starting pitching depth. So if you take one of those young pre-ARB guys plus a Corey Lewis or an Andrew Morris or a Marco Raya or a CJ Culpepper, I think you can start to put together a package that you can live with, and you can potentially get a bat that upgrades the Major League roster in a way that's maybe not like the most exciting thing if you're a Twins fan looking for something to like really rock your world, but something that you could find value in.
I like the way you put that, though. There's something you could live with. That's the thing. Like all of us, I think we can see good things in all the players we just mentioned, but I think it just speaks to not only the minor league system, but the team control on the major league level and all the pre-ARB guys and all that. Like they kind of have to make some trades this winter, or else they're going to end up in a space where they're going to start losing guys to the Rule 5 draft or whatever. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. They're in a good spot. I hope that they're obviously not going to be active on the free agent market. So I'm hoping that they're active on the trade market. That's always kind of a little scary because again, we're talking about some of our favorite prospects in the system potentially getting traded, and but it should be interesting to follow that.
It'll be fun, dude. We got to finish by giving you the opportunity to plug your work because it's amazing and you've been doing this for the longest time at this point. Where can folks find your YouTube stuff, your content? Let's make sure everybody knows where you're at if they don't already, which they should.
Yeah, TF Twins is pretty much the handle everywhere. On the YouTube, do a system recap most nights during the season that shows highlights of the minor league games. As far as this offseason go, we'll be doing weird zine things. If you don't know what those are, but these two guys helped me out with one last year, just kind of doing something different. It's fun to have something physical. And even as painful as it is, this is the 2023 year in review one. As painful as it is to read, a year ago, Tom writing about how excited he was about the Twins and realizing how much things changed. Because I originally wrote that before the payroll reduction story came out. And I thought about rewriting it. And I thought, no, I can't. I'm going to keep that. And then I'll add on to the end of it. So it's just interesting to have, love doing all the digital stuff and everything online. It's been so much fun writing, making videos, being on podcasts like this, being on Twitter, but having something physical is really fun. So if that sounds cool to you, keep an eye out for those.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we will be back next week with another guest. We are welcoming back Jonas Lovin, Cedar Rapids pitching coach. Should be a really exciting conversation. We're going to have the opportunities to ask him about a bunch of the pitchers he worked with in 2024. Jeremy, who's the first guy you're going to ask him about?
Well, Connor Prelip.
Just making sure. So this time next week, Connor Prelip chat with Jonas Lovin should be a blast. Big thank you to Tom for coming on the show. This was super fun. We'll absolutely have to do it again sometime. And thank you guys for listening. Catch y'all next week.